Is systemic racism a conspiracy theory? The LA sheriff who's calling out LeBron James. A judge in Pennsylvania says some lockdown measures are in fact unconstitutional. And CDC's critical race theory training canceled. Welcome, my friends, to the Buck Sexton Show. You feel that? You feel that energy, friends. You see it. You know it. It's there. You can almost touch it. The battle is underway. Who's going to be running this country for the next 4 years? What's that going to mean for your freedom, your safety, your bank account, your everything? You name it, right? Your kids' schooling. There's a lot that's affected by this. I wish we could say we live in a country where no one has to pay attention to who the government is, who's running it at least. But that's not the case. As we know, it's a big deal, big difference. Wars can be started for the wrong reasons. Wars can be lost. Economies can collapse and crash. It does matter who's in charge. And it does matter that we speak honestly about what the real downsides can be. But today I wanted to start with something a little bit different, a little bit less in the center of the news cycle. Oh, there's so much with Trump. And I know we got the Abraham Accords. We'll talk about that later on in the show. But you know, the president signing these agreements for Mideast peace between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. But I want to start with something else, because what has really roiled the country this year, as we know, that the twin pillars of our politics have been COVID, the lockdowns, the response, and BLM. Let's drill down into this BLM issue, which is really an ongoing conversation. That's one way of putting it. Riots and looting and violence and all this around this too, and police brutality discussions. But it's really an ongoing conversation about race relations in this country. And at the center of it, there have been some theories, some concepts that we've all been told we have to accept uncritically. We can't discuss. Isn't it fascinating? Critical race theory is a doctrine that insists that you not be critical of the theory. Right? That you're not allowed. It's based in critique, but criticism for you of these ideas is not allowed. In that sense, it's kind of a rhetorical trick, isn't it? But this was fascinating. There's a guy named Matthew Frank, and he is a associate director of the James Madison Program and lecturer in politics at Princeton University. So this is a smart guy. Never heard of him before. And he wrote this. This was on the publicdiscourse.com, a site I've never heard of before, but this crossed my radar. And I want to tell you about this because it's fascinating and it's philosophically central to this moment we're in. Now, everyone else today is really focused on, Trump did this or Trump said that. And yeah, of course, that's part of our fight, and we have to talk about that on many days too. But I want to take you into the philosophy of the fight for a moment, because there are some concessions that have been made in our debates about all this. There have been some phrases, some mindsets, concepts that we've adopted, consciously or not, that maybe we really need to take a step back and think much more about. One of them would be white supremacy. I've been trying to raise the alarm for a few years now on this show and in every platform and in every area that I can, that white supremacy as a term has been expanded because it is so odious and hateful and wrong. Actual white supremacy, the notion of white people being better than other people, is irrational, immoral, and wrong. And we all agree on that. Right. Our society agrees. White supremacy, bad. White supremacists in movies are the bad guys. They're meant to be cheered against by the entirety of the American audience. And that is what happens. Right. They were the black boot wearing, swastika tattooed, skinhead bad guys of the 90s. That's what white supremacy meant. And you could take it back to Jim Crow and to slavery. And there has been real evil white supremacy in our history. But the term has now been expanded. Now we will hear that the judicial system is a continuation of white supremacy. that land ownership, that capitalism is white supremacy. These are all things the left claims. The expansion of white supremacy to include all these other areas is just meant to be a method of attack that you can't push back against. Well, are you in favor of white supremacy all of a sudden? No, I'm in favor of capitalism. Well, capitalism, according to our new Marxist overlords on the left and the Democrat Party, capitalism is a form of white supremacy. You'd say, well, wait, what? And they'll say, well, look at history and look what's happened. They'll try to make this argument. But ultimately, the argument is, are you in favor of? They're just redefining what white supremacy is. So then you have to say, wait, hold on. I'm not in favor of white supremacy. Aha, you're on defense. You're on defense. Another area of this is systemic racism, right? Systemic racism. Now, it's perhaps worth noting, systematic racism would be a system that, as part of its function, produces racist outcomes. Systemic racism is just a way of saying it's all throughout the system. It's not even just one output of a process. That would be systematic. Systemic is the whole thing. There's racism oozing out of its pores, racism just billowing out from all over the entirety of the system. So systemic racism is really just a fancy way of saying everything is kind of racist that the left doesn't like. There's racism in everything that they don't like. We've allowed this to creep into our conversations. And in fact, I've come across this many times. You'll have people who think they're intelligent, who think they're knowledgeable and wise. They're wrong, but they do believe these things. You'll have Democrats and even some Republicans. Look at Mitt Romney marching with BLM on his never-ending quest to embarrass me and everybody else who voted for the guy in 2012. And he's succeeding. He's succeeding in that quest. Good job, Mitt. But the whole purpose of this is to put you on defense because they'll ask you, are you saying there's no systemic racism? And you turn around and say, well, what does that even mean? And yes, in fact, I will say, where is the systemic racism? Because if you're just going to judge something by the output of a system without looking at either individual circumstances and other variables that go into a system, like the judicial system, for example, you would have to explain, is our judicial system systemically in some ways it is anti-male if you ever spend any time in family court, but is it systemically anti-male because men are 90% of the defendants in criminal court over violent assaults, more than 90%. No, that doesn't make any sense. It's not anti-male. It's just there are more males who commit violent acts than females. I know. Is that, are we allowed to say this? Buck, why are you speaking the most obvious truths that everybody already knows? You're not allowed to do that anymore. Isn't that interesting? Now, to borrow from one of Orwell's lesser known, to speak the truth in a time of universal deceit is a revolutionary act. That's what it feels like right now. There is so much universal deceit going on, and part of it is this systemic racism construct. Now, this author that I mentioned you, Matthew Frank, he wrote an opinion piece in Newsweek, and it was accepted, and he wrote about this on the public discourse. It was accepted on September 11th for publication by the opinion editor of Newsweek, Josh Hammer. I know Josh's work. Josh's a good guy. He's a conservative. He's trying to get diverse opinions on there. It was accepted and published on September 14th in the morning. 2 hours later, the editor-in-chief of Newsweek, Nancy Cooper, just took it down. Just took it down. Who does that? You have opinion editors that are allowed to approve and put on the site things. Here you have an academic from Princeton who writes about whether systemic racism is a conspiracy theory, which it is. We'll get to that. But they pulled down this piece 2 hours after its publication online, which is completely contrary. You're noticing this more frequently now. That happened to the New York Times with the publishing of the Tom Cotton op-ed. That op-ed editor had to resign because he published a sitting senator who, especially in retrospect, made not just an entirely within the bounds of discourse written argument, but was correct in the argument that he made, that the rioting lunatics should face the force of the state. Sorry, libs. But that was the Tom Cotton op-ed of the New York Times. Now we have this Newsweek op-ed. What was the crime, so to speak, that Matthew Frank committed here? Well, he wrote a piece about how systemic racism is effectively a hoax, that systemic racism as a concept is just abused for political purposes, and it does not really exist. It is, in fact, a conspiracy theory because you don't have any proof of it, and it is alleged to be disprovable based upon the emotional impulses around it. In fact, when you try to disprove it, that is taken as evidence that you have fallen for the, or you are part of, I should say, the conspiracy. Right? You are part of the conspiracy. That's why it is a conspiracy theory. And this really upsets liberals. This really upsets them because they think that this is now a centerpiece of their ideology, of their belief. Oh my gosh, I oppose systemic racism. Just like they oppose climate change. Just like they believe in, women's reproductive rights. These concepts that they either speak about dishonestly or they become emotionally invested in without ever thinking, what is it that they're really claiming? What is the real claim of systemic racism? Is that there was racism in the past? There is racism today? If there's systemic racism, show me where it is in the system. In fact, the only systemic racism that really exists is in favor, in our system, of Black and Hispanic and Latino and Native American minorities in college admissions and for employment opportunities. That's the only systemic racial discrimination. And you can say it's positive discrimination. They come up with new terms to justify this, but it's racial discrimination. And as the Supreme Court has already written in recent years, if you want to stop discriminating by race, stop discriminating by race. Very straightforward. And they don't like that. The left is invested in this. They derive power from this. They derive moral meaning from this jihad that they can wage without actually taking any risks themselves. That's what's one of the things that's so seductive about left-wing politics and ideology. All you have to do is espouse the approved phrases. All you have to do is, like a little marionette, dance to the tune that they want you to. And now they'll be nice to you, they'll help you, they'll promote you, they'll like you, and you're a good person. So this is why we have, these libs. This is why you have, a white female Wesleyan grad who thinks that she's a warrior for racial justice by screaming epithets in the face of a black police officer in D.C. who's just trying to do his job. That's how you get to that point in society, because people are invested in this. They like this feeling that they get that is unearned virtue. Unearned virtue is central to the Democrat mindset today. Oh, I believe these things. I share them publicly. I take these positions. I vote this way. Therefore, I'm a good person. I don't even take the position that I vote for Republicans or that I'm a conservative because I'm a good person, although I think you could make that case. But I do it because I think it's just better, correct, right. It makes for a society of more safe, happy, prosperous, healthy, free human beings. But we have to keep pushing for that. It's not just, I take this position, therefore I'm better than other people. So what happened in this Newsweek piece? Why is systemic racism a concept that the left is so devoted to? Well, we should dig into this some more. But here's the short version of what happened in this case with the piece by Matthew Frank. They could not allow, the editor-in-chief of Newsweek could not abide a piece making this case without at least an oppositional piece running alongside it. That was the claim they made. You see, friends, they're always tilting the battlefield in their favor and looking at you like, I'm not weighing in on one side or the other. I'm just a journo. Like we're all a bunch of idiots. New from #1 New York Times bestselling author Vince Flynn, Total Power, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills. In this next thriller in the best-selling Mitch Rapp series, it's a race against the clock when ISIS takes out the entire U.S. power grid and throws the country into utter chaos. Imagine the hysteria, the anxiety, the fear if the U.S. was in darkness. This story is going to keep you on the edge of your seat while taking you through a destructive cyber attack on our nation, a cyber 9/11, making you ask yourself, will it be lights out for America, or can our top assassin save us from plunging into permanent darkness? The Real Book Spy calls Total Power a serious contender for Best Book of the Year. If you're a fan of suspense and thrillers, this is the book for you. Take Back the Power, Total Power. The new Mitch Rapp thriller from Vince Flynn, available in bookstores everywhere in hardcover, ebook, and audio. Pick up your copy today. Is systemic racism a conspiracy theory? Brilliant stuff here from Matthew Frank. You know it's good because the libs panicked at the very mention of it, at the very title, the thesis. They can't handle it. You'd think if systemic racism was so easily proven, if it was so omnipresent, how many times have you heard about that? Turn on CNN. Turn on MSNBC. You'll have some half-wit expert go on TV who says, oh, we all understand that systemic racism exists and systemic racism and systemic... That's just kind of a fancy dressed-up way of saying racism. But then when you're saying, well, if you're going to talk about a system that produces racism, show me the racism in the system, you get nothing. You get nothing. The best they can come up with is disparate impact theory. And when you say, well, what does disparate impact theory tell you? It's, well, look, New York City. I know the prison system here a bit because I work for the NYPD. New York City, 90% of Rikers Island, which is the main prison for New York, is black and Hispanic. Now, are we claiming in this that, or would they claim, I should say, that the Bureau of Prisons, or that Rikers Island, the New York Bureau of Prisons or Rikers Island, is putting innocent people in prison? Is the system racist? Is that why there is that disparity in Rikers Island? Let's hear them make that claim, and then let's talk about that. Maybe they're right, but let's talk about that. Now, I think that they would not be right, but at least we could. No, but instead it's just you are told to bow your head in solemnity and say, you're right. You're right. There's systemic racism. And well, where? This is where Frank makes his most compelling arguments. And this is why the left was so upset with this. Here he goes. Americans, quote, are talking constantly these days about racism. And if anyone needed reminding of its dominant historical form, specifically anti-black racism, it's still a very real thing, and we all have a stake in its eradication. But is systemic racism a real thing in the United States? To judge from the weakness of the case made for it, I would say no. In fact, the thesis for the existence of systemic racism looks just like a conspiracy theory, with one salient difference from other conspiracy theories. Let me explain. My friends, end quote there. This is thermonuclear stuff in politics now. You're not allowed to ask these questions, right? The libs take this as ground they've already won. They say systemic racism, and the right runs and cowers in fear. And you say, why? Can't we talk? Show me this. If you want me to make this better, if I'm supposed to be an ally, which is a term that is much abused, but if you want me to be an ally with you, then point to where this is, and don't expect me to accept false premises or lies or misrepresentations in the specifics. Ooh, it gets better. What does losing your home have to do with the COVID crisis right now? Well, guess what? Cybercrime is up about 75% according to the FBI during the COVID crisis, and home title theft is a cybercrime. So this is a major issue. The FBI is warning people about it. You need to know how it works. Your home's title's online. The bad guys, cyber criminals, they find it, and then they use a quitclaim deed to kick you off that title and replace you with them. Then they take out loans from the equity in your home. They steal it from you and leave you with either the payments or perhaps you don't even find out until you get the foreclosure notice. The usual identity theft services don't protect you, and this crime is so easy. You've got to see for yourself how you can protect yourself at HomeTitleLock.com. Use promo code BUCK. You'll get 30 free days of protection. Again, that's just go to HomeTitleLock.com. Promo code BUCK will get you 30 free days of protection. You can also check to see if you're a victim of this crime and don't even know it. Ah, yes, continuing with this pulled Matthew Frank piece. Newsweek doesn't like to write anything or doesn't like to publish anything that's worth reading, it seems. I love this conceit that conservatives, and Frank writes this, many conservatives know their views must always be balanced and contextualized in conjunction with liberal views in the mainstream media, but liberals' opinions are never treated that way. 100%. You see this all the time. I'll never forget when I was at CNN and I was sitting there with a CNN anchor on set, and I asked her the question because we kept doing these segments, and it would be conservative political commentator Buck Sexton and political analyst Van Jones. Political analyst, gurgling. I'm 180 years old, and Sexton over here wasn't around for the Nixon administration of Rutherford B. Hayes. I'm like, why do we have this guy on TV? Jeff Zucker says I'm smart and sound old and authoritative. But they would always say political analyst for this other person. It was always the other person was a political analyst. Why was I a conservative political commentator, but the Lib DNC propagandist who always got to talk more and didn't get interrupted? Look, CNN was great training. It was like going into the enemy camp for 2 years and seeing how all the sausage is made. And it's gross. But I would see this happen, and I remember I asked the anchor, I said, why is that the case? And she looked at me with just this dumb stare like, what do you mean? And I said, why am I always labeled as a conservative, but the liberal is always just a person who has expertise, a person with a point of view? Now, we all know the answer to this, but when I tell you this, I'm being serious. She's now an anchor on CNN, and she was an anchor then, but now she's a bigger anchor. And she looked at me, and it was clear from her face, and this was off camera, I'm being honest with you, this had never occurred to her before. See, you want to talk about systemic undermining and silencing of conservative voices in the American news media. That is systemic. It's all over the place. You see it. I'll show it to you. CNN doesn't even have real conservatives on air anymore. I mean, they got poor Rick Santorum, who's clearly got a mortgage to pay, so he shows up to get punched in the face over there. I feel bad for the guy. That's it. I mean, what are we? You want to talk about a system? That is a system that is thoroughly soaked with anti-conservatism. So, I'll argue. I'll talk about who are your contributors? How much time do they get on air? How often are they? I can actually point to why I'm saying this is systemic. Where is the proof, taking us back to our initial thesis here? Where is the proof for systemic racism in America? If they're going to talk to me about outcomes of systems only and not what is being done by the system, I would say, hold on a second. Lots of things have disparate outcomes, right? I mean, I remember in CrossFit class, seeing my bench press versus, you put all your stuff on the board, and yes, I could bench press more than all of the women. That doesn't make me impressive, right? But it's a disparate outcome. Yeah. Why? Is there oppression in that system? No, that's just the reality of it. There was no bias against the women. I'm a dude. I could bench more, right? I mean, who cares? I'm just feeling these days like the gym is so depressing because I haven't been in it in 7 months that I'll take any upside I can. But my point is that just because there are differences in a system, unless you're a true communist or Marxist, you'd have to, and as we know, they create in many ways the most disparate systems where you have no rights, where the vast wealth disparities are even greater than they would be in a system like our own. Anyway, but you see here, they won't even allow the debate to happen. They won't even allow the argument to occur. And they don't even, they won't admit to the ways where they're trying to skew the conversation. So back to this Frank piece, where he's saying that this is a conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories are a hardy species of weed, he writes. Anti-Semitism, whether left or right, thrives on them. Think of the foul fantasies of the protocols of the elders of Zion. What else can explain the spread of the ludicrous QAnon? Examples could be multiplied, but two related features mark all conspiracy theories. First, the lack of evidence for their central claims does not count against them. Indeed, evidence to the contrary does no damage to belief in them, but is regarded as either proffered by the credulous or deliberately faked by the conspirators themselves. Second, the very denial of a conspiracy theory's truth is taken as confirmation of it. The denier will typically be declared to be in on the conspiracy himself. Of course he would say that. He's one of them. Judged by the presence of these two characteristics, that for its adherence is unfalsifiable and that denial is taken as a guilty confirmation, the proposition that American society and institutions are afflicted by systemic racism has to be one of the greatest conspiracy theories of our time, so widely believed is it. And what is fascinating, the true genius of the theory is that it has no conspirators at all. It doesn't need them. In fact, their absence is central to the theory. This is important. I mean, I know this isn't a huge news story today. Oh, this is the latest Trump tweet. No. This is important. This is, if we're going to win not just the battle for this election, but the battle for this country's future, we have to fight back against wrong ideas. We have to fight back against destructive, incorrect, divisive ideology. And I have seen this. There is a pervasiveness now of, okay, well, the left went through a period and it went into the 90s where everything was racist. Oh, everything is racist. You watch the movie PCU, and there's a group of, black activists on campus in it, and they walk around, and it's supposed to be a joke. You probably couldn't make this joke anymore, but they just walk around. The tree is racist. The blackboard is racist. The stones in front of me are racist. Everything is racist, right? And if everything's racist, nothing's racist, and we understand that. But now they've added systemic to it. So it adds this pseudo-social science veneer when then people feel like, maybe you're not racist. It's systemic racism. Oh, okay. It's kind of like the word strategic. You add strategic to something and people all of a sudden go, oh, you're not just an analyst, you're a strategic analyst. Oh, okay. Strategic or senior, right? Oh. People all of a sudden are supposed to think differently about whatever that is modifying a senior advisor, a senior blah, 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 whatever it is. But now here we are with systemic racism being dissected eloquently and expertly in this essay and being declared a conspiracy theory. And liberals will lose their minds over this because people don't like to think that they've been swindled, that they've been fooled. And you can't read this and think that there's not a large portion of American society that has bought into this concept that's indefensible on the merits. That's just factually, bizarrely wrong. He writes, quote, "It is usually the case with any conspiracy theory that the identity of the conspirator is a matter of some moment. There may be purported conspirators whose some names are known, or they may remain shadowy figures of mystery. But someone is at fault for the ills the theory claims to explain. Not so with systemic racism. The system, a college or a profession or the nation as a whole, is said to be suffused with racism, and asking for the identity of the culprits is supposed to be a sure sign of the inquirer's naivete. The fault for systemic racism is no one's in particular and everyone's in general, or at least everyone not belonging to the aggrieved class of victims. This unique feature of systemic racism theory is indicated by its very name. As Brian Garner observes in Garner's Modern English Usage, we get into the difference here, end quote. He talks about systemic versus systematic. But a thing, quote, is systemic if it affects or is a feature of an entire system, system-wide. Notice that no personal agency is required or indeed is any part of a systemic phenomenon. And there's the beauty of systemic racism theory. Who's to blame is never answered with any particularity that will fix responsibility on known persons. For the answer is, why, everyone. What could be more impervious to contrary evidence than a wholly impersonal conspiracy theory about human behavior? No one is responsible, and so everyone is responsible. And therefore, who, end quote there, who gets to be the arbiter of how we tackle this and deal with this? Well, the high priests of systemic racism theory, don't you see? It all starts to come together, doesn't it? So I'm walking you through this because this matters. They're using this concept of systemic racism to justify why your kids are learning in school now, the 1619 Project, and how America is a systemically racist country. They're using this theory to jam these, diversity and inclusion program brainwashing programs down your throat in companies across the country. Mandatory now. And they have this like white fragility fraud, this con woman who goes around talking about the white fragility concept all the time. Oh, isn't that amazing? If you don't agree with my systemic racism idea, clearly you're like a fragile white person. See, it's all meant to avoid debate, discussion, reason, argument, truth. It's all meant to avoid truth. Meant to prey on people's emotions. You want to be thought of a certain way. You want people to like you. You don't want to be under attack. You don't want to be under suspicion. So you go along with it. In that sense, it's actually very Soviet in its feeling too. Just go along. Don't raise any issues. Go along. If you go against them, you're a counter-revolutionary. You must be destroyed. And that's where it derives so much of its power from. I wanted to talk to you about this because, one, it's always noteworthy when journalists like the editor-in-chief of Newsweek is willing to abandon central precepts, central tenets, central promises of the profession, right? A doctor who doesn't keep confidence with someone's medical records is not worthy of being a doctor anymore. A journalist who does not believe in the free expression of ideas and does not think that when you print something that is an opinion that one of your editors has put forward, pulling it to try to contextualize it in a way you won't offend your readers is doing intellectual violence to the First Amendment. But more than any of that, I suppose I just want to put you in a position today, those of you who do me the great honor of listening to this show, and we're about to get into all the news, and you'll know everything that's happened in the country by listening to this show, to be sure. But I do think the philosophy matters because when someone now thinks they've got you cornered, or when one of your children comes home from school and thinks that there's only one answer to this question, when someone says to you, are you saying you don't believe in systemic racism? The answer to that question can now be, yes, that is what I am saying. Prove me wrong. Show me otherwise. And that, my friends, will drive the left completely insane. When in doubt, friends, you know what you can always do if you want to try to win an argument and you have a losing argument? Just lie, right? That's what the libs do. I'm not recommending you do this. I'm just saying. It's what the left does. Here is host of The View, Sonny Hostin, who has to clean up the mess that BLM activists made over the weekend. Just to clean it up on TV. Here we go. Play 6.
According to a new Fox News poll, more voters classify BLM unrest as riots rather than protests. And that is scary because that's feeding into this narrative that the Trump campaign has been putting out there. And if you really look at the facts, 93% 93% of protests are non-violent. And in fact, when Trump has put in force, has put in federal enforcement, out of those 93%, the violence ratchets up, right? And so more than 5% of the protests actually that are linked to the Black Lives Matter movement that was met by force by authorities compared to 1% of other sorts of demonstrations like COVID protests or protests about being unhappy about not being able to, go to the barbershop. Right. And so this is manufactured by the Trump campaign. And I just wish that people understood that and knew that and just looked up the real facts about protests in this country.
I know that was painful to listen to, but I wanted you to hear it. This is a person who is paid 7 figures to go on TV and be a babbling moron. Everything that she said there is absurd. It's either just untrue or ridiculously stupid. It's embarrassing, but she's got to carry the water for her side. She's got to be on Team Democrat. And that means she's going to have to say dumb things. Now, I actually think she's smarter than what she's presenting on TV, but it's like she's the lawyer for BLM. She's going to have to try to do whatever she can to keep them out of jeopardy. Nothing else matters. No integrity, no honesty, no intellectual decency in any of this. You know what the percentage of protests that should be peaceful for a movement that claims to be about justice is? 100%. That's what it should be. 100%. You know what they do when they burn down buildings and loot businesses and yell at people they attack innocent human beings who have done nothing to them, who have no part of this. But even beyond that, they are inciting violence against cops. Yes, that's right. Let's say it. They are inciting violence against police officers across the country because they claim, and this is a central claim, this is not a secondary, not a tertiary thing. They make the claim that police are hunting and murdering young black men out of vicious racism in a systemic way. There's that word again, systemic. And that is a lie. It's a lie. It's not happening. But people believe things that they're told, that some people will take action on that. And that is what we saw over the weekend in California. Already early reports that, as I've been saying, who wants to place bets that when you go through this guy's social media, the shooter of those 2 Los Angeles sheriff's deputies, who wants to place bets, you're going to find out. Big BLM supporter. Oh, I'll take that bet. I'll give somebody 10-1 odds on that bet. But the media is, we don't know yet. We don't know if BLM has anything to do with it. That's right. Just delay and run cover for evil. Good job, Democrats.